Hello, ocean people. I'm Brent. The footage was pretty cool, right? Pretty different, unique. It was shot with the Insta360 X4. In this video, I'm going to review the Insta360 X4 for underwater video, but just as soon as I get off these rocks. So let's do that. The Insta360 X4 is a 360-degree camera. That means that when you're recording, it is recording 360 degrees around you, giving you the creativity to hold the camera while you're doing your activity and then frame the shot and create any motion while you're editing. And that is just the beginning. Insta360 offers AI-based editing tools and quick editing tools, mobile and desktop editing apps, and basically limitless creative possibilities with this camera. So how does a 360 camera work? Well, there are two lenses with very wide fields of view recording to two image sensors at the same time. The Insta360 software then stitches those scenes together and even removes the selfie stick, which is why it's called the invisible selfie stick, so that you don't see it in the footage because, well, it's invisible. With this camera and the quick, easy editing tools I'll show you, plus Insta360 accessories, you can create unique angles that look like a third-person view or like a drone shot, or look like really complex shots that might require all sorts of professional equipment. The Insta360 X4 has an invisible dive case for scuba divers, free divers, and snorkelers. That is, well, it's invisible in your footage. Let's talk a bit more about the X4 camera features. The X4 introduces incredible 8K resolution at 30 frames per second, as well as other powerful specs. Those include 5.7K at 60 frames per second, 4K 100 frames per second slow motion, 4K 60 frames per second single lens mode, 4K Me mode that follows you in the frame, and 72 megapixel still images. And that's just the resolution and frame rate. Inside of the X4, you pack a brand new 5nm AI chip with powerful processing power. Battery life has been greatly improved over the X3 and lasts quite a bit longer. So that is great news for all of us underwater photo and video shooters who lock the X4 inside of the invisible dive case for multiple dives during a day. Gesture control is huge for underwater shooters, as you can see here, because you don't have to reach out and touch the camera to start and stop recording. It's easy. On land, you'll benefit from voice control and controlling the camera through the mobile app. With all that said, I think I've saved the best feature of the Insta360 X4 for last. And that is the fact you can take this camera underwater, be in the moment for your dive or your free dive, your scuba dive, because you're recording everything around you. But then the power really opens up when you're editing the footage, because you can create those perspective shifts or follow your buddy, or look at the action. That's really where that creativity comes in, and just the simplicity at which you can create these edits. There's a workflow for everybody. So whether you're using the Insta360 app or Studio, you can really have that creativity to almost seamlessly integrate this footage in with your other footage to create those video stories for your dive trip or your dive, whatever that might be. Let's take a look now at the invisible dive housing, which I have right here. So this is the invisible dive housing, and this is very much recommended for anyone taking the X4 underwater. So if you're taking that Insta360 X4 underwater, you want this invisible dive case. The reason for that is that the stitching will work a lot better inside of the dive housing. There's light refraction underwater. It's one of the properties of water that just won't work so well with the software when you're using it with just the camera itself. Plus, I always recommend to people to use a dive housing with any sort of camera, just because saltwater's hard on electronics. Even if they are waterproof, you're going to get water inside the microphone, and then it'll sound very muted if you're trying to record something right afterwards. So use the dive housing, especially with the Insta360 X4. So let's take a look at how to use this and how to set it up. And here is our invisible dive case. This is what does the magic for us with our 360-degree video underwater. So the most important thing when you're setting this up, or one of the most important things, is to ensure that you put this mount, which is 3 tabs and a screw, straight and in a straight line with the housing itself. So the idea is that once you have the invisible selfie stick in, you have a straight line, because that is what allows the Insta360 software to remove the stick and make it invisible. If you have any sort of angle, then the stick will be visible and it'll look really funky in your footage and might not be invisible. So to open this up, what we do is I will flip it upside down so that the buttons are on the right. And then you open up the 4 latches on the side and you'll notice that they open and fall down. And that allows you to open the top of the housing like this. The next thing you will want to do is add the anti-fog inserts, which go into convenient slots on either side of the lens. And you want to make sure that these are fresh before your dive day, particularly if you're diving in a humid climate where you might have some condensation appearing inside of the housing. So once these are in place, what we will want to do is make sure that we have the camera in dive case mode. So with it on, you do a long hold of the Q button right here. And there we go. You saw those blue hexes span out. Dive case mode enabled, which is great. Now we can put the camera inside the dive case and make sure that it's nice and snug in there. You want to make sure that both buttons on the right line up with the buttons on the camera itself. And now what you want to do is make sure that you have no debris or eyelashes or sand or anything inside of the groove and on this O-ring where it forms that latch and creates the watertight seal. So once you have this pressed firmly, you can do the latches. I like to do the bottom 2 first. So all 4 latches, make sure that they feel nice and easy, like they are working functionally, and then you should be good to go. So now we're almost ready to dive with the invisible dive case, and you'll notice, if you didn't know, that we do not have access to the touchscreen or the bottom buttons. So we're relying exclusively on these 2 control buttons on the side. So the power button is on top and that turns the camera on and off, but then it also allows you to switch camera modes. So if you push like this, you can see that I'm able to cycle through the various camera modes right here. So let me go back to video. There we go. And now I'm back to my video mode. So that's really convenient if you want to switch between shooting video, still photos, or any of the other camera features. Then below that, we have the Q button, and a long press of the Q button, if we watch right here, actually will disable or enable the dive case mode. So if you forgot to turn this on before you close the dive housing, and now you're in the middle of your dive, see it's back on here, then you're good to go. So sometimes you'll figure that out underwater and say, oh shoot, let me turn on dive case mode. You can do that. So thank you to Insta360 for adding that feature to the camera. And then a quick press of the button starts and stops recording. So here we've started and here we've stopped. So that's basic camera operation for the X4 in the invisible dive housing for underwater video and photos. I hope that was helpful. So before we move on, there's a couple things you really need to know about maintaining an underwater housing. The first with these housings is that these domes scratch extremely easily. So be very careful underwater. I would even be careful clipping it off to your BCD because it might bang against something metal and scratch. And once you've got a scratch, if it's a small scratch, it may fill in with water and not be too noticeable. But any big scratch you're going to start to see in your footage, particularly in shallow water with sunlight reflecting, it'll be a lot more visible in your footage. So always make sure that you're protecting the housing inside of the case at all times to make sure you don't get any scratches. The second thing is to always make sure that you rinse the housing in fresh water after each dive. Put it inside of the water, activate the buttons a little bit. The idea is to flush the salt water out of the space underneath these button heads. That way the salt won't build up under there and cause the buttons to start sticking over time. Then once you're done soaking the housing, it can be a couple minutes up to 20 minutes. You want to kind of blow some of that water out from under the buttons, which helps it dry quicker and also helps if you're somewhere where there is harder water that does create some sort of corrosion. Anyways, get that out of there and these buttons will be working like new for a very long period of time, even with heavy ocean use. Now that we've maintained our housing, make sure to store it correctly. And let's go ahead and look at some of the really cool and easy editing that we can do. Now that we have the app open, the first thing we want to do is import our footage. So you can do this by Bluetooth between your phone and the Insta360 app, or like I have, I'm doing a physical connection with the Insta360 X4 Quick Reader, and I've got the micro SD card in here, and that loads right away into my phone or into the computer, which is really convenient and really fast for transferring these files. So if I want to look at editing a clip, let's open this one up. Here I am on the scooter dive, and I am in the kelp forest here, and there's 3 different main editing modes. So you've got Pro mode, Quick Edit, and AI Edit. Now, Pro is the most advanced. AI is the most simple and streamlined for your workflow. So let's start with Pro because we're here. This gives you the most customization for your editing. And you'll notice that you've got a timeline down here, and you've got a lot of different editing tools right here that you can work with. You can adjust all sorts of color temp and saturation contrast, all the editing you might expect. And then one thing that's really important here to call out is with the 360 footage, you can do a lot of perspective shifts through keyframes. So I am going to put a keyframe right here. You'll see that now I've started a keyframe. And let's say I want to now switch to my view. So I'm going to turn this perspective around, and here's me going through the forest. So I am going to tap, and now I've created a keyframe. So what I will do is play that again. And now watch that shift in between the keyframes. Boom. And you can do lots of editing like that. Basically, your creativity is your only limitation. So now if we want to make this a little more simple, we can go into Quick Edit. So now we have a lot of the same tools here. We can change our perspective, create all kinds of unique views, particularly of the scooter in the kelp forest. So you can move with your finger, you can move with this virtual joystick that has little haptics, so that's pretty fun to use. And you can start creating your edit this way. Now what you can do is start recording, and let's change our perspective a little bit, and then we can save that. And as you do that a couple different times, you'll notice that I am saving these different clips with my real-time edits here into a little bit of a video story. So if you want to take your clip or multiple clips and create that video story, you can do that so easily here with Quick Edit. Now, if you want to let AI do all the work for you, you'll see I've actually let it process a little bit beforehand, but you can do all kinds of different AI edits. So this is a compilation. I have one at 55 seconds with music, one at 13 seconds. There's a selfie view, little versions and clips. There's forward view, and there's some other stuff that the AI has put together. So this is super useful if you want to let AI do the work for you. Let's take a look at one example. Thought I would gloss over Aquavision 2.0 underwater color correction just like that? No way. Let's take a look. We can access Aquavision 2.0 through the 3 buttons up at the top here. And we scroll down, and under color, you will see the button right there. So turn it on, come back to the footage, and you'll notice that one of our first options here in the tools is Aquavision 2.0. So at this point now we can adjust the tint to really get that color that we want. You'll see the subtle differences in the reef underneath me with some of those reds and purples. And then you can also adjust the intensity of the effect. So all the way, not all the way, until you find something that you think looks really good and natural. So now I've opened up Insta360 Studio on my computer, and you'll see that this is the large screen editing option. So editing on the mobile phone through the app is very easy, intuitive, and quick, but sometimes you might want to use Insta360 Studio to help refine clips or maybe make it fit better into a workflow with footage from your interchangeable lens cameras or your smartphone. So this is another great option for editing. You'll see that all the clips are imported on the left, whether they are local files or still camera files on the camera itself. And then you'll see we've got a title bar at the bottom and a very visible export button. But basically, we have a lot of leeway here with editing. So you can trim your clips very easily by moving the playhead and hitting the trim button, or you can drag the end of the clip around based on where you want to start and stop the trim. And then you can just drag the camera around to get the angles that you want, the perspective. So it's really nice with your mouse, and you'll see that I'm using 8K footage here. So it scrubs really easily thanks to those LRV files that are used in both the app and the desktop studio. So what else can we do here? We can add keyframes, which I'll come back to. We can do a deep track 3.0, and basically you would track your subject just like this. What else do we have? We've got time shift, and then we've also got motion ND. So if you want to create motion, for instance, if you're on a bicycle or a motorcycle. So what I might want to do here is, let's say I'm coming up from the water. Let's start my clip right here, and then I want to end it right here. I'm coming up to the surface. That's good. So that's my clip. And then if we're playing here, maybe I want this angle. So let's add a keyframe. And then by the time I don't want to move the keyframe. I'm coming up here. I want to adjust my view so I'm kind of looking more at the surface at this point. So really quick, I just added 2 keyframes. Let's play that back. And now you'll see that the perspective is changing slightly, and we see the top of the water. So it is that easy to use Insta360 Studio. So to sum up the editing, basically there is an easy workflow for everybody. Whether you want one quick clip for social media and let AI do the editing, or you want to create a sequence of clips to tell more of a story and mix with other camera footage, you can do that, or anything in between. So really you've got a lot of flexibility with editing the great footage from the X4, and that's one of the beauties of the 360 camera. You enjoy the dive, you shoot, and then you do the creativity in post once you're on the app itself. So now let's talk about a few shooting tips to make sure that you get the most from your camera and from your footage, and hopefully get the most wow as you're sharing your footage with friends or social media followers or whoever that might be. The first tip is that the X4 does best in great conditions. So you want bright sunlight, you want clear water, and if you're using 8K, you want to stay shallower in the water. As you go deeper, you want to start going more towards 5.7K 30 with a slower frame rate because you're deeper, as opposed to 60 frames per second or even slow motion. That just gets more challenging as you get deeper in the water. So be sure to look for those bright conditions and great water clarity, and you're going to get great footage from your camera. The second important tip is that you want to make sure that you are holding the camera in the invisible dive case at a straight angle. So we already mentioned the importance of having the housing in line with the invisible selfie stick. The other thing you need to do is when you're shooting, try and hold the camera straight in front of you. So I'm at a 90-degree angle in front of me, as you can see. And what that does is it allows the lens to be facing towards you. You can kind of see what you're recording right here. And you're recording 360 degrees, but the seams are going to be on the sides at 90 degrees from you, which probably isn't the most mission critical piece of the footage you're capturing. You want to see you or what you're seeing forward. You can also hold the stick out like this, and you can always extend the stick as well too, to different lengths. So check out the invisible selfie sticks. There's a few choices, but hold this straight out in front of you because now everything above or below is going to be captured by either one of these cameras. The only thing about this angle though is that the seam is going to be right in front of you. So you may see a little bit of that seam connected through the software if you're holding the camera straight out in front of you like this. So just something to keep in mind. But aside from that, you want to use either of these two right angles because you do have refraction of light underwater and you may catch glares and things from the water or the sunlight on the surface. So you are going to minimize that occurrence if you are holding the camera in one of these two positions. So try not to do any diagonal type stuff. You could always go like this as well. Again, another 90-degree angle below you. So that's a huge tip. Keep those two things in mind. But there's also a few more tips I can share. The first is that you don't want to overdo the footage. You don't want to overcook it. And what I mean is you have so many creative possibilities with changing your perspective and distortion with this camera that if you do that in every single scene and you create those small planets every 4 clips or something like that, it's going to get very tiring for your viewer. Instead, save those big effects and those big changes for moments to create maximum impact, right? Where you're swimming together with your buddy and then you zoom around and you see what you're looking at and zoom back to see your reaction. Those are some of the best ways to use the 360 camera perspectives. On a similar note, don't be afraid to experiment. Really dig into that Insta360 app, explore some of the AI editing, explore ShotLab and some of those pre-created effects to see what makes sense. Maybe one of those effects will inspire you to then do your own manual version of it and control it a little more. So you can get those ideas that will then inspire your own creativity and you can execute and then share that footage. So be sure to experiment as much as you can. Finally, the last tip is that if you're going to be telling a story and using a sequence of clips, make sure that you are keeping your clips interesting. Find those elements of interest. We don't need to see 20 minutes of just swimming around underwater with a lot of movement like this. Hold the camera steady, find those clips of interest, and try and tell that story. Find a big establishing shot that shows where you are, what you're doing, then show moving into the action. Maybe it's you and your dive buddy. Then get that closer up shot of the marine life you're looking at. So creating that sequence like that will create the most interest for your viewer. And with that said, there is one last bonus tip, which is that when you're shooting on a selfie stick, you always want to be careful of people around you. There's probably other people with cameras. So if you have this stick out at maximum length and you're jamming it all in front of everybody and kind of getting into their shot, and you're bumping the marine life, or you're trying to stick this in front of a turtle who's swimming away from you so you get that first person perspective, don't do that. Don't harass the marine life. Remember that this is just like any other camera. You have to be respectful, and honestly, your presence in the water and the way you interact with the marine life is going to get you the best footage. You don't need to be sticking your camera in all these weird places. This is beautiful. You saw some of the shots that I did. I did move it underneath the kelp and things like that. But again, don't mess with the marine life just because you can. You'll get better footage by not doing that. And that's it. So hopefully this review of the Insta360 X4 for underwater video was helpful for you. As always, if you have questions, leave them below. If you have comments, leave them below. I answer all questions and comments. And if you like what you see, let me know too. We'll do more videos on the Insta360 X4, maybe dive into settings or different water conditions or whatever you might want to see. So leave those notes, subscribe if you like this, and I'll see you in the next video.